Story 1. Somehow we brought in bedbugs. They are an epidemic here. There is no shame in getting them, but there is shame in keeping them. Some people react to the bites while others do not. I looked like I had rubbed poison ivy all over my body, but he did not. He refused to let me get rid of any of the clutter, preventing me from cleaning and dealing with the pests. I said, "We have to do something. I'm being eaten alive." His response, with a verbal shrug, was, "Well, they're not biting me, so it's fine. If you can say that to your spouse of 25 years, the marriage is already over." I took what I wanted from the house and about a month later told him I was done. He was, of course, entirely shocked and surprised. Story 2. After another year of unemployment and no help paying the bills, I did our taxes. He had made a little money on the side, but despite my begging him to set aside cash for taxes, he didn't. He just expected me to pay his taxes, which completely wiped out the modest return I was due. I ended up owing nearly $2,000 that I did not have, and when I came to him in a panic and asked what he set aside to pay the tax, he just shrugged. I don't even remember what he said. I just remember the shrug. The relationship ended right then and there during that conversation. Story 3. I realized I no longer loved him. I was exhausted from not being listened to, from walking on eggshells, and from being blamed for various things. I endured silent treatments whenever he didn't get his way. I was the only one trying to maintain and grow the relationship, and I was tired of the effort. By the time he started trying, I was already finished. It was too late to fix things. Story 4. 6 years together, 3 months married. I was feeling very depressed, and one morning, as I was getting ready for work, he came into the bathroom and said he would do whatever he could to support me and make me happy. I responded, "Okay. Well, one way you can support me is to not yell at me anymore because it makes me feel unsafe." He replied, "That's just how I am." I left that morning and only returned to collect my things. Story 5. We had been together for 9 years. After 7 years, he started having periodic episodes where something minor would happen, like when I politely asked him not to yell while drinking because it could wake our child. He would scream at me and punch walls. The next day he would apologize, and months would go by until the next episode. Over time, the episodes became more frequent, to the point where it was happening every other week. The final straw was when he screamed at me all night over something minor, and while our child was in the room, he threatened to harm himself because the yelling wasn't working anymore. This was a wake-up call for me, and I've been happier and healthier ever since leaving him. I'm enjoying dating these days, taking my time to find someone who will treat me the way I want to be treated and who I can treat well in return. Story 6. He came home with a birthday presentation his coworkers put together for him. It went on and on about how great he was. So supportive, always willing to listen, providing great advice and fun. However, he was none of those things at home anymore, neither for me nor for our kids. Story 7. Fundamentally, the moment my ex started to demand that our then 10-year-old son give up his hobby to afford a trip that my ex wanted to take was the breaking point for me. I realized that our views on life no longer matched. I apologized for not sharing any entertaining stories, but that was my situation. The divorce was difficult, but it was worth it. Story 8. He left his computer unlocked. I never bothered to go through it for many years, despite him leaving it unlocked several times. He is not very discreet in naming his files, regardless of how many drives and folders he has. In any case, he is a pedophile. Story 9. He was unemployed but needed the car for a day to get to a job interview. Then he forgot to pick me up after my shift at work for 4 hours. I had to take a ride-sharing service home, bang on the door to our apartment until he woke up and unlocked it, and he had the audacity to get mad at me for waking him up. Most of our 20s were wasted because he wanted to take a nap. There were other issues, but that was the worst and made me wake up and realize that even dying cold and completely alone would be better than being with him. Story 10. Dating for 5 years. At our friend's wedding, someone asked the table when they knew their partner was the one. My boyfriend stared blankly for a long time. That moment confirmed a long-standing paranoia I had that we didn't feel the same way about each other. I broke up with him a month later. We hadn't been unhappy, but I just knew. Never for a day in our relationship have I wondered how my now husband feels about me. Story 11. I went to therapy for something completely unrelated to my marriage. I ended up finally admitting how miserable I was in it and asked for a divorce after 16 years. Story 12. I kept asking for us to go to therapy to work through our issues, but he said I should just go alone. This made me feel he thought it was all my fault and had no intention of changing anything. I later found out that he told someone I was just going through a midlife crisis and would get over it. He was blindsided when I left. Story 13. It was many, but the night he got drunk with a couple of friends he had been hanging out with a lot. An older gay couple who I was sure he was involved with, and after yelling at me about Milo Yiannopoulos for an hour, repeating, "You just don't understand." He tells it like it is. He passed out. An hour later, he erupted out of our room, went to the stove, opened the oven door, and started urinating. As I tried to pull him towards the bathroom, he whined at me. "Dude, stop. I'm trying to piss. Ha ha ha. Tell Nate to keep his ass up. I'm coming back in, and I want to have more fun." Nate was one of the couple. I tried shaking him. "You're not at Nate and Aaron's anymore. You're pissing in the oven." He gave me a bratty, drunk look, squinting and confused as he began to regain consciousness. "Bro, you sound like my name, and it's bumming me out," he said, plucking at my shirt. "Take this off. Better get naked, because I need to get home soon, and I want to have more fun first. I told you he really sucks." Meaning me, the old ball and chain. Story 14. After a few years, I realized the only time we were happy together was when we were intimate. Story 15. When you marry, you agree to an agreement and vows. In sickness and in health, right? We had been married for 7 years. We were both angry with each other, and I ended up going to my parents to give us some space. I developed a peritonsillar abscess and was in the hospital for 3 days. Family and friends visited, but my wife did not come, even knowing I was in the hospital. Right then and there, I knew. Story 16. Years of him being an active alcoholic and me being constantly angry led to many breakups until the last one stuck. After the first year, mutual friends said he was sober, but I had heard that before. 2 years later, we ran into each other. 1 year ago, we got engaged, and 5 days ago, we got married. There hadn't been a drunk or angry moment since that last reconciliation. Story 17. When I experienced a hypertension episode late at night after putting our daughter to bed, I was sitting in the kitchen feeling unwell, scared, and anxious. I called him and expressed how I felt, but he responded, "What do you expect me to do? Call an ambulance if you're sick. That's not my problem," and then went to bed. In that moment, after years of neglect towards both me and our daughter, I realized he would never be a decent husband or father. Story 18. I was with my ex-husband for 6 years. At 23, I suddenly realized he had taken advantage of my youth. He was 10 years older than me, 27 when we first started to date. He controlled many aspects of my life. I had no access to money, as he monitored our bank account and would accuse me if we were low on funds. He insisted that I must have children and restricted my choices in many areas. I experienced financial, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. The list goes on. Being young and without family to support me, I didn't know much about life. Then one day, I woke up and recognized that this man had groomed, trapped, and abused me for years. I took the children and left him. Now he is 37 and has a 23-year-old wife, and I feel sorry for her. I know what he is doing to her. Story 19. First, he cheated. I took him back, and he made all sorts of promises to change but proceeded to break every single promise within 9 months. That was it. I was done. I moved him out and got a divorce. Story 20. Together for 16 years and married for 10, the breaking point came when I realized he would say all the right things in therapy but would never actually change his behavior. I recognized the patterns from very early on but didn't understand their impact on our relationship until much later. He was blindsided, but I had no energy left to keep waiting for him to change, so I left. Story 21. I was in an 8-year relationship, which I suppose counts. Over time, especially around the fifth year, we began to see each other more as friends. Eventually, I initiated a conversation about our future and realized we weren't on the same page anymore. After about a month of deliberation, we decided to part ways. It may not be the most exciting or scandalous story, but sometimes it's that long complacency that can be detrimental to relationships. Story 22, 10 years together. He always had an anger problem, but suddenly it started getting worse. One day, it escalated to the point of physical assault. There were witnesses who called the police. I walked away that day with a restraining order and never looked back. Story 23. Disregard for my feelings and opinions. Realization that my autonomy was being taken away. Cheating wasn't as hurtful as the idea that I was made to feel like I didn't exist. Intentionally picking away everything that made me who I am. Story 24. 20-year marriage. His pornography addiction fueled a dead bedroom for most of that time. It was completely inactive for the last 6 to 7 years. The resentment and hurt from the intimacy issues began to spread into other problems. He showed no real, sustained interest in fixing the issue or acknowledging the impact. When I realized I no longer wanted him to touch me at all, my therapist told me that was a very normal, expected reaction to repeated rejection and unlikely to recover. Story 25. I was stressed over financial issues. Some good friends helped me, but then my mom passed away. She stopped taking classes, couldn't hold a steady job anymore, and struggled with substance abuse. I kept telling her that I needed her help. My credit cards were almost maxed out, and I couldn't handle the stress anymore. She exploded on me for spending time with friends, and we started arguing. She screamed at me, saying that I had chosen to be with her and should have known what I was getting into from the beginning. I needed to just deal with it. That was the beginning of the end, and I realized I was with the wrong person. I wish I had ended things right then, but I cared about her and didn't want her to be homeless or living in her car. Story 26. I could no longer tolerate his angry and violent outbursts. Any disagreement would lead to him screaming in my face, throwing and kicking things or flipping furniture. It was terrifying, and I dreaded waking up to him and coming home to him. I finally realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life walking on eggshells, never knowing what version of him I would encounter. The final straw was when he kicked a glass candle at me. Story 27. She criticized me for not filling up the firewood store that day. It wasn't empty. She just wanted it full. I mentioned that, and it led to a huge argument with her calling me many names. This was the evening before my father's funeral. I ended the relationship immediately. I'm still in the house until she buys me out. Life is challenging right now, but on the bright side, I just got promoted with a significant raise. Story 28. We were trying to move into a new place together when she told me she had feelings for a friend after 7 years together. It turns out she had been unfaithful in one form or another nearly the entire relationship. Story 29. Together for over 20 years, I was ready to start trying for kids after 4 years. He kept stalling while assuring me he absolutely wanted them. In reality, he did not want kids. He wanted me and knew I would leave if he told me he did not want children. I tried to make it work and accept the situation. I started working 13-hour days because I didn't want to go home to the house I was paying for, as I resented him so much. That was the moment I was done. Took me another year to end things, but I never looked back. I have 0 regrets about leaving him and many regrets about waiting so long. Story 30. After 17 years, I realized I disliked the man he had become. I needed to leave for the sake of our children. Story 31. I discovered, after nearly dying from a blood clot, that she had been calling her former partner from my house while I was lying in my hospital bed. Story 32. He paid for OnlyFans content early in our relationship. I always had a sneaking suspicion he had, and I asked him multiple times. He finally confessed, but I was so frustrated that he could look me in the face and say he hadn't during all those times I asked. Story 33. Watching him realize that my depression was something I had to actively navigate and accommodate, not something that would ever magically disappear. Story 34. It's funny. Before we married for 2.5 years, I thought he was really bad at conflict management, but that seemed fixable, right? Everything else was so good. Then the ring went on and he escalated to the real deal. Name-calling, giving me the silent treatment, gaslighting, telling me I deserved what he had done to me, and finally culminating in him abandoning me 3 days into our 2-week vacation to a foreign country for no reason at all. I don't know why I stayed after that, probably because I wanted to make sure I had tried everything possible to make it work, to make him see, and to make him care that he was hurting me. I went through 6 months of marriage counseling with him, but he only attended because it was an ultimatum after the vacation, and he confirmed I was right the first time. Now I am divorcing him, and he is determined to make me as miserable as possible. We had been married for 18 months when the vacation incident occurred. He literally told me a month ago that he was going to try to prevent me from divorcing him, as if we were living in the 1800s. Story 35. I ended up in the hospital due to heart issues from overworking, despite being in very good physical shape for my age. I was averaging 62 hours a week, doing almost all the cooking, at least 80% of all household chores, and all of the outdoor chores. My ex was a stay-at-home mother while our child spent all day, 5 days a week, at daycare. She later admitted to having an affair and tried to blame me for not paying enough attention to her. We had a disconnected relationship for most of the year. She would hit me when she was angry. For years I brushed it off because of her small stature. I never knew what would set her off. Good riddance. I should have divorced her years earlier. Borderline personality disorder is a difficult condition. Story 36. After 3 expensive years of law school, he didn't study for the bar exam. He knew he had to take it and that the only way to pass was to study. But he did nothing. I realized then that if he didn't care enough to study for the bar, he wouldn't care enough to take care of our kids, and I was not about to raise children alone. Story 37. When I was in the military and deployed, I spoke on the phone with her. She asked if it would be okay to go to dinner and a movie with a colleague from her work. A date. I guess at least she asked, but she continued asking even after I returned, so I was done at that point. I mean, why get married if you still want a date? Story 38. I was with him for years as he struggled with major depression and suicidal thoughts, refusing to seek help. He would throw pity parties, suffer in agony, claiming there was nothing he could do. I couldn't force him to get help, only encourage him with resources, although he usually reacted poorly. I never knew what mood he would be in. I was the disrespectful one, ungrateful and a poor communicator, holding everything in to keep the peace. After his 3rd job in 4 years, he reached a point where he couldn't get out of bed anymore. We decided he would take a professional sabbatical in January 2024 to seek help. Literally 1 day later, he said he was cured and didn't need help, just needed to rest and work for himself. 2 weeks later, the symptoms returned. I was paying all the bills, his mortgage, household repairs, groceries. I had to walk on eggshells around him because he would snap at me constantly. He finally went to the doctor 2 months into his sabbatical and was prescribed a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which he considered adequate help. He also believed that the prescribing nurse practitioner was sufficient therapy. Once again, I encouraged him to see a psychiatrist and a true therapist, but he insisted he didn't need that. With me working 40 to 60 hours a week, going to graduate school full-time, and paying for everything while he sat on the couch and contributed nothing to household chores. No dinner cooked, no errands run for me. I held everything in to keep the peace so he could live in comfort. Eventually, I exploded like any other human would. His response was, "You're doing too much. If you keep going down this path, you will wind up depressed and burned out, just like me." I wanted to scream, "I am nothing like you," but I didn't. The tipping point came in February 2025 when he suffered a traumatic brain injury. I made arrangements to work from home, stayed with him the entire time in the hospital, brought him home, and was his primary caretaker. I kept up with his medications to prevent him from overdosing on pain medication and deposited the weekly check I would give him into his bank account so the bills could get paid. I dealt with his hygiene needs for several days while he was recovering and even cleaned up his vomit. He was a monster to me. I couldn't do anything right as his caretaker. I understand that traumatic brain injuries can alter a person's personality, but I could no longer endure the torture after about a month. Eventually, I broke down, called his well-off parents to get him help, and informed him that I was leaving. In the end, I was labeled the crazy one, bipolar, and needing help. I was seen as dangerous and unstable, twisting everything he said out of context. He was never mean, just cold at times. He actually kicked me out, and I felt relieved. I will never tolerate such treatment again. I am currently in aggressive therapy. Ladies, take note. At the first signs of unhealthy behavior, get out. He had been an attorney, and I clung to what I thought was his potential for far too long, hoping he would eventually improve. Maybe he will one day, but I realized I wasn't worth the hard work. Story 39. When he looked me in the eyes after I had offered intimacy and said he had plans with another person, and that it would do me no good to ask him not to go. We are separated, but until that point, the goal had been to reconcile. After that, I decided I would rather be alone than lonely. Story 40. When they continued to walk away from conversations about my emotional challenges, I felt isolated. During the one time in my life when I was extremely depressed and needed support, they were not there for me. Story 41. Once I found my husband passed out on the floor in our bedroom with a bottle of poppers on the bed. Our 3-year-old was sleeping in the room next to him, where he could have easily walked in and found him and the poppers. Story 42. When my then-wife loudly insisted that the most important things in her life were Jesus, the kids, and bringing up the rear me, my retort was, Jesus isn't rolling out of bed at 5:30 a.m. for a 12-hour workday. I was divorced 6 months later. Story 43. She started making significant life decisions without me. I was 30 and had a well-paying job that required little of my time, thriving in our area. She was 26 and finishing her undergraduate degree after taking a few years off to return to school, just as I had. She also had a good job and many opportunities in our area. Our goals and lives were mostly compatible, and we had a strong and healthy relationship. However, our major difference was that I was comfortable in our current life, while she was always seeking to drastically change course on a whim. She encouraged me to be more ambitious and step out of my comfort zone, while I helped temper her need to constantly seek something new when she felt life wasn't meeting her expectations quickly enough. Not due to me, but for professional and spiritual reasons. It was generally a good balance, but we often found ourselves in a state of compromise. I wanted to keep my job for another year or two and buy a house in our great college town to at least get a foothold on the housing ladder. She wanted to leave without plans as soon as she finished school. She knew I was flexible about moving with minimal plans, but I believed staying a bit longer in our current situation would be wise for our near future plans of marriage and children. My compromise was to travel with her for 4 months after she graduated, but we would return to our current life for a year afterward. I managed to hire a temporary replacement for my job, and my company was generous enough to allow me to do this. We had an incredible summer of travel and some seasonal work along the way, making great friends and many memories. When it was time to head home, she quietly felt resentful towards me. After some cocktails at a family gathering, she made it clear that she planned to travel and work abroad with a group of friends we'd met during our trip, and she expected me to join her. She had developed a taste for this exciting but unsustainable lifestyle that I had already experienced at a younger age, and she wanted more. She urged me to come along and briefly entertained some of my compromise ideas, but ultimately her mind was made up. She was going with or without me, and we'd have to figure it out from there. I recognized that this woman I loved was in a different phase of life than I was. I understood that if I returned to that lifestyle, the stability and financial freedom I'd worked hard to achieve would be nearly impossible to regain in the near future. I realized she was prioritizing the potential excitement over our relationship. Heartbroken, I made the difficult decision to step away. Her initial travels didn't go well, and she soon begged to have me back. I was still very heartbroken and expressed that I needed some time to think. After a couple of weeks of reflection and limited communication, I ultimately agreed to return. By that time, however, she had found another exciting, albeit brief, opportunity and said, "No thanks." This was doubly heartbreaking. Story 44. Married for over 11 years, She came home one day and was mean and short with me. This was common at that point in our marriage. I said, I can live in the same home as you while you continue to mourn the loss of your affair partner, but I need you to be kinder to me. Her reply was, I don't have the energy to be kind to you. All the energy I have goes to our children, my mental health, and looking for a job. That was the moment I knew I was done. Took another 10 months before I had the courage to leave. Story 45. We were together for 4.5 years. After spending so much time, money, and effort to celebrate his birthday, I thought he would plan something nice for Valentine's Day. He never did, and when I called him out and reminded him that I went above and beyond for his birthday, he responded, I didn't ask you to do that. My love for him died that day. To this day, I still can't believe I was planning to marry a man like this. Story 46. When I started intentionally delaying my return home from work. Story 47. It was a weekend, and I had been coaching at a tournament for about 16 hours. When I got home, my husband had ignored our sick dog in favor of drinking and playing video games. I came home to multiple piles of mess. A week or two later on the weekend, I returned from coaching at a tournament all day, and he informed me that he was inviting friends over and expected me to clean the house and shovel snow. It became abundantly clear to me that things would be much easier for me on my own. Story 48. She said she was visiting her sick stepfather on the other side of the country. In reality, she was just one town over having a threesome with a wannabe 50-year-old 1980s tribute band singer and his wife. Not good times. Story 49. I went abroad for 3 months and talked to them on video chat every day, as we had promised. Yet, they failed to remember significant events in my life. On the last day, they initially didn't answer my call, and when they called me back later, they were at a friend's house drinking and smoking. While this is acceptable, the timing was off. They did not inform me about their plans to visit this friend, who had caused problems in our relationship before. This situation strained my relationship when I returned home, and I felt disconnected. It took me a few months to come to terms with my desire for a divorce, but that incident was truly the final straw. Story 50. She told me she was visiting her aunt in Florida and wouldn't really have internet or even Wi-Fi during that week. She was staying at a guy's house for 7 days. I found out because a mutual friend of ours accidentally posted a picture on Instagram of them hanging out, and I saw it before she took it down. What's funny is that our mutual friend reached out to me, telling me that she made a mistake and uploaded an old picture, even though I hadn't asked her anything. After some polite questioning, she revealed the truth. I never confronted my girlfriend. I didn't have to. She got back from Florida and didn't even let me know. We never spoke again. Story 51. Already separated for a few months, she hit me. The attorney filed for divorce the next day while the stitches were still fresh. Story 52. When, after nearly 3 years of marriage, she came home one day and asked me, "Are you leaving or am I?" It seems she had found a lingerie magazine in my closet with one of my female coworkers' name on it. She was completely convinced that I was cheating, even after I told her that I had borrowed it to get her something for her birthday. From that point on, my wife had nothing to do with me, and within 2 weeks, she moved all her things out of the house and filed for divorce, serving the papers on our wedding anniversary. Story 53. After 28 years of marriage, she cooked dinner maybe 5 times. There comes a point when cooking dinner at 9 p.m. after a 14-hour day while she sat at home does affect you. Story 54. I found explicit photos of the 15 or 16-year-old he met at his younger sister's high school. The photos were taken inside my apartment. Story 55. It was just a breakup, but I dated a guy with some issues. We met online and discovered that we both loved horror movies and were into light bondage and discipline. But it turned out he was far more obsessed with both than I was. The first time I went to his place, I should have run. He lived in his father's basement, though he insisted he paid half of the bills. And the place was covered in Halloween horror decorations. There were skulls and bloody chains hanging from every wall and shoved into every corner. I thought it was odd, but I was young and assumed it was probably harmless. The next issue was with the bondage play. I enjoyed it but quickly realized he needed something related to it to be aroused at all. When I tried to suggest, nicely, that I wasn't sure I could be in a relationship that always required something bondage-related, he pointed out that I was not as skinny as his usual girlfriends and he had to put up with that. He apologized profusely after I said let's break up and suggested we add something seemingly bondage-related, like non-type bands on my chest. I was ready to call it off at that point, trying to gather the courage as he kept apologizing when I tried to end things. Then the last straw came. He kept lying about the reasons he was on disability and not working. Initially, I can't remember what it was, but that changed to back issues, then something else, and finally he told me he was on disability for anger issues because he had blacked out several times and assaulted someone without remembering. At that point, I was absolutely convinced he was a serial killer in the making with all the different issues coming together. I was very careful breaking it off since I didn't know how true his blacking out into violence issue really was. I was supposed to not be worried because it was always men that he claimed he had beaten. It took me a month of back and forth phone conversations to finally be free. He kept saying, if we go through with this, it's forever. And I would agree, saying that was for the best, while he doubled back and tried to rationalize giving it another chance. I don't remember what, if anything, finally convinced him to stop calling, but I have never been more relieved to have someone out of my life. Story 56. He would never do any housework. I asked him to take out the garbage and clean the kitchen since he used it more than I did. I handled every other chore. He would never do them on his own. I would ask him, and then, like a month later, he would do it. I started tossing the garbage into his bathroom since he had separate bathrooms. It would stack up until he couldn't reach his bathroom without cleaning. One time, he got angry at me for making his bathroom dirty. That was the end. I was done. I asked him to leave, and within a month, he was gone. Story 57. He explicitly stated that he wanted to restrain and physically harm me because I frustrated him. He phrased it as if he were asking for permission. This came after years of emotional abuse that I had been in denial about, since it was never physical, and I had downplayed it to myself. But there was no denying this. I was terrified. Story 58. It started when he told me he cheated on me. We decided to try to work through it. Then he received deployment orders. His parents accidentally told me he was coming home for rest and relaxation. They genuinely thought he had informed me. Communication was fairly accessible at the time. I was upset but thought maybe he genuinely believed he had told me. He was under a lot of stress after all. Then these 3 things happened in those 2 weeks. The first was when we were pulling up to the airport to pick him up for rest and relaxation. I was happy to see him, but I wasn't excited. The second was that whenever he touched me, I felt nauseous. I wanted to vomit every time he tried to be intimate with me. I began avoiding spending the night with him. The final realization was that there was a problem. I planned a date around the things we both liked. It was a couple of hours out of town, and I thought this would be a great way to reconnect. He complained about everything. At that point, I realized I was truly miserable around him, so I turned the car around and dropped him off at his parents' house. I broke up with him in their driveway. Story 59. I'm disabled and use a cane. She was going to meet a financial advisor and planned to drop me off at the downtown library for genealogy research. She has directional weaknesses and wanted to drop me off 1.5 blocks away in mid-July when it was 105 degrees. I tried to explain that we needed to go further down the street to stop. This started a big argument, so I just said forget it and got out. I slung my laptop over my shoulder and walked 1.5 city blocks in the 105-degree heat to the door. I filed after that. Story 60. We were together for about 13 years, and it seemed amazing for quite a few of those years. It wasn't the repeated incidents of him drinking and driving home. It wasn't the partial truths about substance use at an event I wasn't at. It wasn't the 5th canceled couples counseling appointment in 2 years. It wasn't arranging for the wives of his friends to stay with me after I came home from the hospital following surgery, with our mothers accompanying me the majority of the time I was there when he said he would take time off work but didn't. It was when I watched him unmasked and drunk again at a neighborhood block cookout during COVID, when he didn't realize my immunosuppressed self was absorbing the atmosphere from the porch. He lied about it and then told me that the only person he wanted to distance himself from was me. He wanted to leave when I got sick, but didn't want to be seen as the kind of guy who left his sick wife. I don't even know if he remembers saying that, but that was when I knew I had to stop trying to save something that was already rotting from the inside. Story 61. I had known I was done for a long time but hadn't worked up the nerve to leave. Then we decided to share a house with a close friend to save money on rent. He decided he didn't like that friend and that I seemed to get along better with him than with my roommate, so he kicked the friend out while I was at work. I came home to find my friend gone, asked what happened, and he told me he had gone behind my back to change the lease to have only his name on it since he was friends with the landlord. For some reason, that did it. I said, "Perfect. Since I'm not on the lease, I'm free to leave." And that's exactly what I'm going to do. And moved out that night. Story 62. For 14 years, I walked on eggshells, was yelled at, and was gaslit into believing I was worthless. All the while, I was the only one who attended functions with or for the children. She stopped talking to me for 6 months. I felt as though everything I did or tried was wrong, and I started noticing she refused to try to help herself. She sought attention through online means. She told me she doesn't love me and unfairly resented me for years, but she was having too much fun to stop. I'm alone, but I get to see my kids every day, and that's enough for me. Story 63. We are still together, but I still may not fully understand her autism. I am a great partner, in her words, but I am neurotypical and it's challenging, especially in heated moments. However, we are working on it. Story 64. He cheated multiple times and then got upset when I didn't talk to him for 3 days after the last incident. For some reason, he didn't think he was at fault. Story 65. I dated a guy for 2 years. I swore I would never date a fisherman because of the time spent away. Well, he got a job in Alaska. We dated for 8 months and then he left for 3. I was in agony over kissing him. When he got back, I started to notice how unhappy I was. Over the next year, he became more abusive, graduating from emotional abuse to physical. I still stayed. Right before he left for Alaska again, I bought a new loofah for the shower. He exploded at me, screaming about the new loofah. It was insane. I was so deep in the relationship that I literally thought I had sinned for buying a new loofah. He left for Alaska again, and I realized I didn't want him to come back. Thankfully, I had enough time alone that I broke it off immediately when he returned. I was grateful that he was a fisherman. The loofah always stuck with me. That was my breaking point. However, I did have a 2-bedroom townhouse in Seattle for 3 months during the summer, so that was nice. Story 66. After 13 years, she just didn't have time for us. She stated her job as a flight attendant wouldn't allow for proper communication, and that I should be happy with the little I did receive. I assumed there was another man in her life and found evidence of it. I confronted her and asked who it was, and she replied, "I'm not telling you anything. I chose to focus on myself just as she did." Story 67. After years of begging, crying, and trying everything to make him engage with me, the kids, and life in general while being the sole breadwinner and primary parent the entire time, I spent 6 solid months in couples therapy during which he also refused to engage but wouldn't consider divorce. I finally told him I was done trying, and if he wanted to fix things, it was entirely up to him to take action. He got furious, claiming it wasn't fair because relationships are supposed to be equal. I looked at him in disbelief and asked why it had been acceptable for me to carry the burden alone all those years. He had no answer. We signed the papers today and I'm free. Story 68. He frequently made microwave popcorn, and when he took it out, it would always drip butter all over the counter. Despite the sink and a paper towel dispenser being just inches away, he would leave it there and never clean it up. No matter how many times I pointed it out, asked him to clean it, yelled at him, or explained why it was so disrespectful and annoying, he never did. I would cry, expressing how much I was growing to hate him, but he still wouldn't do it. Eventually, I felt complete hatred and had no love left for him. Story 69. 21 years of marriage. We had rough spots and were going through another one. The moment I knew we were in trouble was when I suggested couples counseling again, and she said no. There is no way to save the relationship if she doesn't want to save it. Story 70. When I realized I laughed more and had more fun with complete strangers than I did with my husband. Only enjoying time with people outside my home was not how I wanted to live my life. Story 71. My friends listened to me talk about the relationship and gently asked, "Are you happy with them? It seems like you're actually pretty unhappy." They didn't push it, but it made me really think about it and eventually end things after 10 years together. It was the right choice. Story 72. After we had our child, I matured, but they didn't. I was 25 and they were 31. Suddenly, their goofy and carefree nature no longer felt like a good thing. It felt like I was parenting two people. I couldn't count on them to do anything independently. They needed me to hold their hand or guide them through it. That's when I realized that if I stayed, I would spend the rest of my life being the only competent and reliable person in my household. I didn't want that for myself. Interestingly, the person they dated after we ended our relationship did the same to them. They eventually realized that this new partner was never going to grow up and that they were the only functioning adult in the relationship. After a few years of trying to make it work, he ended it, came back, and apologized. He told me he understood why I left. By the time he left her, he didn't look the same. He looked years older than his age now. I'm so glad I left before it got to that point for me. Story 73. He began to feel genuinely annoyed with me, not in a cute way. It reached the point where it seemed like he hated me when he rolled his eyes, rushed me everywhere I went, and slapped my arm whenever I said something with a slight undertone of sarcasm or meanness toward my friends. Story 74. When I realized that the children listened to everything and that it was more harmful for them to stay together than to be apart. Story 75. She said that she didn't care about my day at work because it did not exist for her. She didn't see it or experience it, so why should she care? Prior to this, she had successfully pretended to care about everything in my life. Story 76. After 3 years, he brought up the idea of selling my home and moving in together. I realized that I never truly considered him as a husband or envisioned starting a family with him, and I wanted my life to take a different direction. He also realized that I was holding him back in many ways. We broke up amicably, and it has been 4 years since. We still catch up occasionally because my family loves him, and he loves them. I visit his family from time to time because I care about them as well. Story 77. She blamed my parents for her third DUI. They visited maybe once a year, living across the country. She claimed she wouldn't have drunk so much if she had taken care of our young son, and it was my parents' fault. Story 78. Things had been difficult for a while. She was having an emotional affair, justifying it by claiming that it never developed into a physical one, though she had made attempts. She couldn't understand why I felt that an emotional affair was worse. She lied about where she was and what she was doing. She made little effort to fix things, and when I took her to couples counseling, she became more angry and resentful. She moved into our guest room for the last couple of months. I gave her the space she requested. I did everything I could think of to help. One morning, she demanded via text that we get divorced that very day. I took off work, went to the courthouse in a daze, and filed the paperwork. She moved out the following week. Through all of this, I never gave up. About a month after the divorce was final, she called and asked me to meet her somewhere for a beer. I still hadn't lost hope. She made small talk for a few minutes and then blurted out, "I'm mad that you didn't fight harder for our marriage." I laughed in her face, an outburst of hysterical laughter. She had been intentionally and thoroughly destroying the life we built together over 10 years for the previous 6 months. She threw herself at another man and carried on an emotional affair for months. Everything I tried only made her more sullen and cruel, and it was my fault. That was the moment I truly gave up. Story 79. He and his mother wanted me to sleep on the floor of my own home because my mother-in-law got the bed and he got the couch. This was the week my mother died. Story 80. Not me, but one of my best friends of the last 30 years. His wife, unbeknownst to him, decided to stop taking her medication that he had no idea she was even on. Apparently, she was unstable and had been admitted to a psychiatric ward multiple times. She attacked him with a baseball bat while he was asleep, believing he was robbing her house. He was shocked but thought she was just having a panic attack. 3 weeks later, while making dinner, she was using a meat mallet on some chicken and suddenly slammed it down on top of his hand as hard as she could, shattering several bones. She laughed and told him he was overreacting to the pain. He drove himself to the hospital, and after 3 surgeries over the course of 2 months, he was okay. Needless to say, a few days later, when she went to work, several of us went over there and helped him gather his things. He moved in with me for a few months until he could sort out the legal matters. Thankfully, she had no idea where I lived at the time because she was attempting to track him down by showing up at our friends' houses trying to force their doors open. Last I heard, she had 6 children from 3 different men. Unfortunately, she was very attractive, but on the crazy hot scale, she was a 10 for attractiveness and a 9 for craziness. She was always able to find a new partner quickly and caused chaos in their lives too. Thankfully, my friend escaped before they accidentally had any children. Story 81. Married for 6 years and together for 8. I felt lost and young and wasn't getting anything out of the relationship. I was more of a mother and nurse to a man older than me who had uncontrolled diabetes than an actual partner. We went on a camping road trip for a week, and when we returned, I had to leave the next morning for a 3-day work trip. I was exhausted from the fun trip and even more tired from the work trip. When I got home, not a single thing had been put away from the trip. No groceries were bought, and no dishes from his time home alone were done. I stormed out to go grocery shopping, thinking to myself, is this what the rest of my life looks like? I parked in the store lot and called my brother, who had gone through a divorce not long before, to ask when he knew it was time. I immediately drove home without groceries and told my ex that I was moving out and that it was over. By that point, it was probably the 100th time he had avoided doing any housework because it was easier for me to just do it myself, but that one pushed me over the edge. Story 82. You know the phrase, you really don't know someone unless you see them go through a birth, a death, or a promotion? Well, it's true. To preface, my ex-husband manipulated me away from my family, so I ended up looking up to my boss, who became a father figure to me. I loved him like a father. He was the nicest, most courageous, and fun person I had ever known. He had a pure heart. He was a wonderful boss and a dedicated husband and father. He adored his family and always managed to go above and beyond for our company and his staff. He died of a very painful and rare blood cancer. It was sudden. My ex-husband knew this man and had met him a few times, even speaking highly of him on occasion. When my boss passed away, I grieved for days. Work was difficult. The staff cried every day for weeks. After a few days of mourning, my ex-husband asked why I was still crying because it had been enough time and he wasn't family. When I told him I needed longer to grieve, he began to berate me, suggesting that the only reason I could still be sad about this was if I was having an affair with this man. Anyway, that was where I drew the line. Things had been piling up between us, but this was the final straw. I immediately told him he was an insecure person and that I wanted a divorce, along with many other things I had been holding on to for years. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.